What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Sloppy Saturdays. And today, as we're a little late on this, we are talking about Deuce Knight committing to Ole Miss. Why I believe this is such a big transfer for Ole Miss's future because of everything going on with that program. We're going to talk about how this happened for Deuce Knight. We're going to talk about why this happened for Ole Miss. Why Ole Miss was put in such a bind because of how everything worked out with them with the season. How, again, the overhaul with their coaching staff, how late their college football playoff run. I believe it all affected the transfer portal. And the biggest thing that we're going to start this off with is how big of a bind they were in because of the unknown of Trinidad Chambliss. Now, when we look at Ole Miss's QB room, I believe they had two starting quarterbacks in college football when it came down to Austin Simmons and Trinidad Chambliss. Austin Simmons was a guy that waited multiple years behind Jackson Dart. He was ready to take over in the beginning of the season. Obviously, as everybody knows, he gets hurt within the first two games of the season. Trinidad Chambliss comes in and he hits the ground running. He turns into one of the best quarterbacks this season in college football, arguably the most electrifying quarterback in college football. And when you talk about this year for Ole Miss, how that QB situation pan out, the best way it could have possibly panned out, because like I said, Ole Miss went on a deep run. They were seconds away from going to the national championship. Trinidad Chambliss was that guy. But unfortunately for Ole Miss, the way that QB situation ended up panning out, it kind of killed them for their 2026 future because they were depending on Trinidad Chambliss to really push for this eligibility to come back. Obviously, he was not granted that, and he still hasn't made a decision if they're still going to push for it more or he's going to enter the NFL draft. And then as a result, behind him, Austin Simmons, a guy that I think very highly of, even though he wasn't the most highly graded recruit. Everything I've seen from him, I like. And again, we know the athletic ability he has. He pitched for Ole Miss baseball team as well. That was a guy that was supposed to be part of your future for the next 2 years, I believe, if he was able to start and continue the season. Again, like I said, for this season, you're definitely the best quarterback went out in Trinidad Chambliss. But again, it put them in a weird spot with everything going on for their future. Now, when they were looking at QBs in the transfer portal, I believe they really couldn't commit to any QBs that wanted to be starters next year because, again, there was a lot of unknown with Trinidad Chambliss. Is he going to come back? Is he going to be granted the eligibility? Like I said, he was pushing for it. So I think they went for the best quarterback in the transfer portal that would have worked with either situation of the eligibility granted. When you look at a freshman in Deuce Knight, a guy this young, I think he would have sat behind a really great Ole Miss program for a year if need be. But obviously, like everybody knows what happened with Trinidad Chambliss, he was not granted a 6 year, so now he's able to start. But like I said, I think the way the Trinidad Chambliss situation was going on, it took Ole Miss out of a lot of these top quarterbacks in the transfer portal. Because when you look at a Sam Levitt, when you look at a Darian Mensah that committed late, like none of those guys were going to sit behind Trinidad Chambliss. They had to go for a guy that's young with upside that could start for you next year or can sit for you next year. A guy that's flexible like that with his age and everything that he's looking to achieve. I think Deuce Knight was the absolute perfect transfer for Ole Miss because, again, like I said, this guy physically, how highly graded he was, as you see on the screen, he was a 96 quarterback grade. Even with, again, him playing very limited in college football, he was the 8th quarterback in this transfer portal cycle. He's shown the ability in the one game he played that he's a legit rushing threat as he had 13 carries for 162 yards. He had 4 touchdowns on the ground, 239 yards in the air. I want to talk a little bit about why he transferred out, which I think made complete sense. When we look at Auburn last year, I thought they were a complete disappointment. They had a guy in Jackson Arnold that was a highly graded recruit that they were trying to rebuild. And they also had Ashton Daniels in the room as well, who's a starter for Stanford, that it hasn't really worked out for him as well. But when you talk about the talent on this offense, I believe they had one of the best receiving cores in all of college football, not just the SEC. When you look at Cam Coleman, who just transferred out, and you look at Eric Singleton as well, those are two guys that could possibly be wide receiver ones in college football. Obviously, Cam Coleman he has top 5 upside in college football. And Eric Singleton, like I said, another big receiver. This team had a ton of talent. I thought their defense was pretty good as well. I thought they had a lot of talent on both sides of the ball that they just didn't get a lot out of. Again, middle of the season, they switched quarterbacks from Jackson Arnold to Ashton Daniels. Nothing's going right for this offense. They can't get the passing attack going. Also, in the middle of the season, their coach gets fired. Obviously, they bring in Alex Golesh, and along with Alex Golesh also brings in his QB that was one of the top QBs in the transfer portal, Byron Brown. So this leaves Deuce Knight in a very weird spot. But like I said, in the middle of this season when the quarterbacks were flipping and getting injured, Deuce Knight was able to put a little bit on tape for a game against Mercer. Again, they absolutely blew them out. I know what you guys are going to say. This was against Mercer. But at the same time, I mean, he showed what he was able to do. But like I said, with everything going on with Auburn, everybody basically left that program. Like I said, key talents like Cam Coleman, like Eric Singleton, and also like a Deuce Knight. I mean, you're talking about a guy that was nearly a 5-star, guy with a super high grade, a guy that Auburn would definitely like to keep in house if they could have got him to sit for another year. Because again, this guy was the future of the program. He leaves now. The only issue I have, I think this is a tremendous opportunity for Deuce Knight to go to Ole Miss because again, now you're looking at like again a 90, 85, 90% probability that Deuce Knight is going to start right away for Ole Miss. He's starting for one of the best programs in the country, a program that again with their deep run, even though with all the coach turnover and the headlines, that deep run caused a lot of people to stay in house. A key player like Kawan Lacey, one of the best players in the country, opted to stay at Ole Miss along with other key players. So again, I think the run Ole Miss had allowed a lot of people to stay because, again, if they would have just imploded and didn't take that deep college football playoff run after all the news headlines with Lane Kiffin, I think, again, you would have seen a lot of turnover, whether it was to LSU, whether it was to the transfer portal or to the NFL. But again, they were able to keep a lot of roster intact. Deuce Knight has the opportunity to start with arguably the best opportunity in the transfer portal. My biggest thing for Deuce Knight and how I want to end off this video is I think for Ole Miss, this is such a pivotal year because, like I said, you had that deep run after Lane Kiffin left, but that is still Lane Kiffin's roster that he built. Now, the first year after Lane Kiffin, I think Pete Golding really has to prove to, again, a lot of recruits in the country, a lot of players in the country for the future, that he is that coach to, again, keep everything stable at Ole Miss and continue to keep Ole Miss as a contender. And my biggest question with Deuce Knight, somebody with such limited play in college football, I get it from a physical standpoint. This is one of the most talented Ole Miss quarterbacks that they could possibly have. But with limited college football play, is he going to be able to hit the ground running in the SEC? Like I said, everything we have saw from this guy has looked really good, but it has been limited. And like I said, this is such a pivotal year. They don't even have Charlie Weiss on the sidelines like they did in the college football playoffs. He's going to be going to LSU as well. So with a whole new coaching staff, I think it's such a pivotal year for Ole Miss to prove that they're going to be a consistent contender without Lane Kiffin and the staff. And I'm a little worried with Deuce Knight. I think he could definitely do it. But at the same time, we've seen such limited amount to play from him. But for Deuce Knight, I believe this is a tremendous opportunity. You got out of a really bad situation in Auburn, and you get into a much far better situation in Ole Miss. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays. Drop down below if you still like these single episodes on these transfer guys. That's what I think these next couple of weeks, next month's going to be for me. I'm going to really just key in one episode on a singular transfer guy this season. That wraps up this episode of Sloppy Saturdays, and we are out.